Hey, tonight we're going to throw you into the first day of the Tang Dynasty. You might not make it past 24 hours. I am not trying to scare you, but just the language barrier alone could make you question everything. Before you get too relaxed, go ahead and hit the like button, of course, only if you genuinely enjoy my content. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your city and the current time, so I know who's time traveling with me tonight. Now, dim the lights, turn on a small fan for some background noise, and let's dive into tonight's story. You open your eyes and find yourself standing on the bustling Juchu Street in Chang'an. The sun is blinding, dust is swirling, and the noise around you is overwhelming. You're about to ask for directions when, wait, you realize you can't understand a single word they're saying. It's not classical Chinese or the formal written language, but real Tang Dynasty spoken language. You thought you could get by with a little Zhihujiyi classical phrasing. Think again. People in the Tang Dynasty spoke like they were rapping, short syllables, sharp intonations, and a mix of slang you've never heard. You try to ask, "Excuse me, how do I get to the Western market?" And the person stares at you, wide-eyed, like you're some kind of monster. Panicking, you try something simpler, water. Where is water? The person frowns, then suddenly has a realization and eagerly points in a direction. You walk with hope, only to find a public toilet. Turns out, the Tang word for water doesn't sound anything like the modern pronunciation, and what you just asked probably sounded more like poop. Congratulations, you've successfully made a stranger think you're a weirdo urgently needing a restroom. To make matters worse, there's no standard Mandarin in the Tang Dynasty, and regional dialects vary wildly. You could be encountering the dialects of Guangzhong, Luoyang, or even a version of Han Chinese with a Xianbei accent. Even if you've memorized the 300 Tang poems here, you'd be considered illiterate. You try to write to communicate, but quickly realize Tang Chinese characters differ from modern ones. The character for tea is missing a stroke, the character for fruit has an extra one, and even the character for bright has you doubting whether you've lost your memory. Even worse, many common people were illiterate. As the sun sets, your throat dries, your legs weaken, and you finally understand the meaning of struggling to move even a step. No translator, no phone, just basic survival turned into a guessing game. And this is just your first lesson in the Tang Dynasty. You finally manage to get a bowl of water by gesturing wildly, and just as you're about to pull out your phone to pay, you suddenly realize a terrifying fact: there's no Alipay here. Embarrassed, you pat yourself down and find only a few modern banknotes. The vendor's expression shifts from confusion to suspicion, and people around you begin to point and whisper. To them, your 100-yuan bill probably looks like nothing more than useless scrap paper. What's worse, a couple of street patrol officers are already heading in your direction. In a panic, you dig into your pocket and pull out a coin. The people stare at the shiny, strange copper coin in your hand, and someone exclaims, "Counterfeit money." Chaos breaks out immediately. In the Tang Dynasty, minting your own money was a serious crime, and you were just a hair away from getting a taste of Tang prison food. After barely escaping, you finally start to understand the Tang currency system. Only the official copper coin, Kaiyun Tengbao, is considered real currency, but most ordinary people only have a handful of small coins. Large transactions were done with silk or cloth. You'd need to carry several rolls of fabric with you. Silver? That's a rare commodity, and most common folk would never see it in their lifetime. The most mind-blowing part is the exchange rate. One copper coin could buy you 2 flatbreads, but if you wanted to treat someone to a meal, you'd need to bring a sling of money. That's 1,000 copper coins, weighing a whopping 4 kilograms. Imagine yourself lugging around 10 to 15 pounds of copper coins while shopping. And then there's the money shortage. The Tang Dynasty was in the midst of a currency shortage, and there was never enough copper coinage in circulation. You'd likely encounter situations like vendors refusing to accept coins that weren't up to their standards, people swapping goods directly through bartering. Or, worse yet, you'd be forced to accept IOUs, an ancient form of credit. When you see someone in the Western market trading a piece of silk for a live sheep, you'll finally understand what economic collapse truly means. And at that moment, your stomach starts growling again. Starving, you stand in front of a food stall in Chang'an's Western market, eyeing the array of dishes on display. Finally, a sigh of relief escapes you. At least you can order with your eyes. You point to a bowl of red, steaming soup dumplings, anticipating a spicy, comforting bite. The first spoonful freezes your expression. This isn't the fiery burn of chili, but a strange, bitter sensation that stings. The vendor proudly tells you it's seasoned with zhuyu, and suddenly, a cruel reality hits you. Chili peppers won't make their way to China for another 900 years. In the Tang dynasty, spiciness came from zhuyu, bitter and astringent. Ginger, spicy, but lacking any fragrance. Pepper, an expensive luxury, more valuable than gold. You look hopelessly at the jar of zhuyu powder, thinking of the bottle of Laogan Ma, back home. Tears well up involuntarily. But that's not even the worst part when you realize that delicious also includes cho sauce made from fermented soybeans, a smell so foul it could knock you out. Raw fish slices dipped in garlic paste, no wasabi. Kwai, thinly sliced raw meat, undercooked. Suddenly, you understand why Li Bai loved drinking so much. Maybe it was just to numb his taste buds. Even worse is the selection of sweet flavors. Honey, reserved for the aristocracy. Malt sugar, sticky enough to pull out your teeth. Cane sugar? Not even invented yet. When the vendor enthusiastically recommends dessert Xinglao apricot paste, you find it's nothing more than crushed apricots soaked in water. At this point, you miss milk tea with all your heart, even the unsweetened kind. As you watch the locals enjoy their food with gusto, you finally grasp the meaning of the gap of an era. It's not just a difference in taste. It's a complete fracture in the food system itself. Suddenly, a sharp pain strikes your stomach, and it dawns on you that there's an even more urgent problem at hand. Using the bathroom in the Tang dynasty is basically an extreme sport. The kind vendor kindly points you in the direction of the latrine. As you get closer, a potent stench hits you first. You pull back the cloth curtain, and your stomach churns. Two rickety wooden planks stretch across a deep pit, the stains on them marking the achievements of countless previous users. The worst part? The gap between the planks, completely lacking ergonomic design. A single wrong move, and you'd be plummeting into the depths. The Tang dynasty's toilet etiquette is enough to break your spirit. No toilet paper, just bamboo, or wooden sticks, called shuchou. The more refined households might use broken pottery shards, with edges sharp enough to shave. The common folk? Likely resorting to leaves or chunks of earth. You squat cautiously on the planks, and suddenly you understand why ancient people wore such long robes. It's probably the only privacy they had. What's worse is the acoustics. The thin wooden walls amplify every sound. Outside, a line has formed, and someone impatiently coughs to hurry you along. Afterward, the next challenge presents itself: cleanliness. You reach for a shuchou, and immediately long for the softness of modern toilet paper. These thin bamboo strips feel more like you're chiseling wood than wiping, and a little too much pressure results in blood. You now truly understand why the ancients described using the toilet as a battle. When you finally emerge from the latrine, your legs are still shaking. You notice the night sanitation workers in the corner, pushing a cart to collect waste. That's Tang Dynasty's public sanitation system. At this moment, you can't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the modern invention of the flush toilet. As the last rays of the setting sun color Chang'an's walls crimson, you suddenly hear the sharp beat of drums. Pedestrians quicken their pace, and vendors scramble to pack up their stalls. It hits you like a thunderclap. Tang Dynasty's curfew is about to begin. The guards at the gates are already clearing the streets, shouting at you for still lingering. In a panic, you dash into the nearest gate, and with a deafening bang, the heavy wooden door slams shut, the sound of the bolt dropping sending a shiver down your spine. Now, you face an even graver problem. Your inn is in the neighboring Chongrenfang. All the gates are locked. Wandering the streets will get you labeled as a thief. Worse still, you don't have a guosu, travel, pass, or anyone to vouch for you. The Tang Dynasty's curfew laws are shockingly severe. No travel after the evening drum at about 8 p.m. You can only move again after the morning bell rings at around 4 a.m. Violators get 20 lashes. You squat in the shadow of a gate, watching the patrolling guards with their torches pass by. You quickly shrink back into the darkness. On this cold night, you finally experience the full weight of number 24-hour convenience stores. No food delivery apps. Not even a place to escape the wind. When the night watchman's third bangzi stick strikes, you start to seriously consider knocking on someone's door for refuge. But the fear of being mistaken for a thief and dragged off to the authorities makes you reconsider. That night, under the unusually bright stars of Chang'an, you realize for the first time how much you miss a 7 to 11 and a hot bowl of Odin. Shivering in the cold of curfew night, you huddle under the eaves of a house, waiting for the first light of dawn. When the morning bell rings, the gates of the neighborhood finally open, and you rush to the inn you had eyed the night before, only to be told that all the rooms are full. The innkeeper, noticing your disheveled state, kindly suggests, "Young master, perhaps you should try Pinkang Fang. They have more inns there." Dragging your tired body, you make your way to Pinkang Fang, only to realize that it's Chang'an's famous red light district. Women, heavily made up, wave scarves from the balconies of the brothels, and raucous laughter echoes from the taverns. Blushing, you keep your head down and hurry past, eventually finding what seems to be a respectable inn. One night in the upper room, 200 copper coins, the innkeeper says, without looking up, his fingers clicking the abacus. You pull out your heavy purse and count the coins. Only then does the innkeeper look you over. Are you from out of town? Do you have a guosu? Your heart sinks. In the Tang Dynasty, without a government-issued travel pass, even staying at an inn is a problem. Seeing your hesitation, the innkeeper sighs, "Add 50 more coins, and we'll pretend we didn't see." After paying, you follow the attendant to the upper room, a less than 10 square meter space with a grass mat on the floor and a chamber pot tucked in the corner. The window paper has a hole in it, and the night wind blows right through. The attendant sets down an oil lamp and prepares to leave. You quickly stop him. "What about the bedding?" "Young master, don't joke. With this weather, who needs bedding?" The attendant looks at you like you're crazy. "If you're cold, you can rent a blanket from the shelf for 20 coins a night." Gritting your teeth, you fork out more money and get a musty old blanket in return. Lying on the stiff grass mat, you begin to long for the soft down comforter from home. Just then, a heated argument erupts from the next room, followed by the sound of something shattering. You realize with horror, soundproofing in the Tang Dynasty is non-existent. As if that wasn't bad enough, in the middle of the night, you're suddenly woken by an unbearable itch. Groping in the dark, you light the oil lamp and, to your horror, discover that several bed bugs have crawled out of the grass mat. Your arms are covered in swollen bites. At this moment, you miss modern-day bug spray and hotel hygiene standards more than anything else. As the first light of dawn breaks, you're jolted awake by the persistent sounds of street vendors calling out their wares. You push open the creaky window, and the entire city of Chang'an is already alive, louder than you could have ever imagined. Outside the market walls, vendors are shouting hot, steaming flatbreads. Freshly made sesame porridge. Further off, the clanging of the blacksmith's hammer rings out, and the creaking wheels of ox-drawn carts roll across the cobblestone streets. A few children are chasing each other, laughing and shouting as they run by. You rub your temples, realizing that in the Tang dynasty, the concept of noise pollution doesn't exist. Starving, you follow the mouth-watering aroma to a breakfast stall, only to be taken aback by the scene before you. Is this breakfast? The vendor is kneading dough with his grimy hands, flies are having a party on the sauce jars, and the chopping board where the meat is cut looks like it hasn't been washed in years. Reluctantly, you order a bowl of porridge, only to find that the rice is mixed with gritty sand. Just as you're hesitating, a craftsman next to you happily chews the sand and finishes 2 bowls. The vendor, clearly irritated by your hesitation, shouts, "Young master, are you eating or not? If not, move out of the way." After barely managing to fill your stomach, you decide to take a stroll through the Western market. As you approach the street corner, a wave of foul odor hits you. It's a dung collector cleaning out the neighborhood latrine. You quickly cover your nose with your sleeve, but you notice the locals strolling by as if nothing unusual is happening. What's even more horrifying is that the butcher's assistant, standing in front of the meat shop, casually splashes blood from the meat washing process onto the street, drawing a swarm of buzzing green flies. This is so unsanitary. You mutter to yourself, but an old man overhears. Stroking his beard, he chuckles, "Young master must be from a wealthy family. Chang'an has a population of over 1 million. If everyone was as finicky as you, how could the city function?" At noon, you pass a bustling restaurant, and suddenly notice the chef wiping the sweat off his face with a cloth, then using it to wipe the spatula, continuing to stir the food. Your stomach churns, and it finally hits you. No wonder the average lifespan in the Tang dynasty was only in the 50s. The midday sun is growing more intense, so you decide to find a place to cool off. As you walk by a tea house, you spot a sign that reads refreshing beverages and, feeling like you found a lifeline, you rush inside. "Waiter, 1 cold tea, please," you say, wiping the sweat off your brow. The shopkeeper smiles warmly and brings over a bowl of murky liquid, with a few suspicious-looking leaves floating on top. Hesitant, you take a sip, only to have your face contort in disgust. This is no cold tea. It's clearly ginger soup with salt. "This is authentic jiancha," the shopkeeper proudly explains. "We grind top-quality tea cakes into powder, then cook it with ginger, cinnamon, green onions, dates, and mint, finishing it off with a pinch of salt for extra flavor." You stare at the onion slices floating in your bowl, and suddenly understand why Lu Yu wrote the Chajing, the classic of tea. In the Tang dynasty, tea leaves were ground into powder and boiled into a paste. Various spices were added for flavor. A good tea had to be foamy to show skill in preparation. As you struggle to swallow the tea porridge, a group of scholars at the next table begins a drinking game. Their drinking vessels are exquisite, but the wine is as murky as leftover rice water. You curiously ask, "What kind of wine is this?" "Good eye, young master," one of the flushed scholars exclaims, raising his cup. "This is Xinfeng wine, one of the finest brews in all of Chang'an." You take a cautious sip, and the sour, astringent taste immediately overwhelms your mouth. It turns out that in the Tang dynasty, alcohol content is as low as beer. The wine often contains impurities that settle at the bottom. Due to poor filtration methods, the wine is always cloudy. What really sends you over the edge is when you ask for an iced drink. The shopkeeper stares at you like you've lost your mind. "Young master, are you joking? How could there be ice in June? Unless you're a royal or aristocrat, who could afford ice stored in a cellar?" Walking out of the tea house, your throat is drier than when you came in. At this point, you find yourself longing for a cold Coke from the fridge, even if it's sugar-free. As dusk falls, you drag your exhausted body back to the inn, only to face a new challenge. The innkeeper's assistant eagerly greets you, "Young master, would you like a bath? We've already prepared hot water." Elated, you follow him to the courtyard, but when you arrive, you're taken aback. In the open air, there's a wooden tub barely higher than your waist, with a few workers running back and forth carrying hot water. What shocks you even more is, this is a communal bath. The previous user has just left, and there are still a few suspicious hairs clinging to the edge of the tub. Wait a minute, you stammer, don't you have private baths? The assistant looks at you as though you're speaking nonsense. Young master, are you joking? It takes 2 full loads of firewood to heat a tub of water. How could we afford one for each person? As you reluctantly begin undressing, you're faced with something even worse. The soap, or bath bean, is made from pig pancreas and bean powder. The towel is a rough piece of hemp cloth. The changing area is right in the open for everyone to see. As you step into the tub, you find the water temperature fluctuating wildly between hot and cold. It turns out that in the Tang dynasty, bathers follow the ritual of 3 warms, 3 cools, pouring hot water on themselves using a wooden ladle. The most embarrassing part is that a few other guests are waiting nearby, eager to use the same tub, and they even offer to scrub your back. Halfway through your bath, a worker suddenly tosses a handful of powder into the water. What's this? You ask, horrified. High-quality spices, the worker says proudly. Especially prepared for distinguished guests. You sniff and realize it's a mixture of cinnamon and other odd-smelling herbs. At that moment, you long for your shower gel and a proper shower head, and you even start to miss the gym's perpetually malfunctioning water heater. Finally, after surviving this bathing ritual, you return to your room with wet hair, only to find a few fleas on the bed. That night, you toss and turn, scratching furiously, and it finally hits you when ancient people talked about the importance of bathing and changing clothes, they weren't kidding. This is truly a survival challenge. As the first rays of morning sunlight streamed through the window, you had barely slept a wink, tortured all night by the fleas. Just as you were about to try to catch up on some rest, a loud, jarring sound woke you up. Someone was desperately banging a copper basin against the city walls. Fire! All households send someone to help put it out. In a panic, you quickly threw on your clothes and rushed outside. In the southeast corner, thick smoke was billowing into the sky. The locals were forming long lines, passing buckets of water, but the small amount of water they could provide was barely enough to put a dent in the roaring fire. What was even more terrifying was how the neighboring wooden buildings quickly caught fire, one after the other, like a row of dominoes. Sparks flew in the wind, and in no time, the entire district was engulfed in flames. It was only then that you realized the city of Chang'an's fatal flaw. The buildings were all made of wood. The streets were narrow, offering no barriers to stop the fire. There was no professional fire brigade. The nearest water source was a well, 100 meters away. An old man, his face covered in soot, sat on the ground, wailing in despair. Everything's gone. I've spent 30 years building up my life's savings. You now understood the common folk in Tang Dynasty had no banks, and their wealth was all intangible goods. A single fire could wipe out everything they had. It wasn't until noon that the fire was finally brought under control. You looked at the charred ruins and suddenly realized your own inn was downwind from the blaze. Sure enough, the innkeeper, with a mournful look on his face, came to announce, "I'm afraid, all guest rooms are going to be demolished as part of the fire breaks." You patted your money pouch, realizing that what little was left in it wouldn't be enough to find new accommodations. Worse still, your travel permit and personal belongings had been lost to the fire. At that moment, standing on the streets of Chang'an, you truly understood what it meant to be stranded in a foreign land. The sound of the evening gong echoed in the distance, signaling that curfew was about to begin. Watching the gates close, you couldn't help but long for the fire alarms and insurance policies of the modern world. As night fell, you huddled in a corner by the city wall, feeling like a homeless wanderer, trying to figure out how to survive. Your stomach growled in protest. It seemed even watching the fire had drained your energy. You fumbled through your last few coins and decided to solve the hunger issue first. A street vendor waved at you cheerfully. Freshly baked golozi. Just one for you, sir. You eyed the food suspiciously. It looked like some kind of lamb sandwich. How much? You asked cautiously. 5 coins each, buy 2, get 1 free. For a moment, you felt like a genius. So, I can buy one for 2.5 coins, right? The vendor's smile instantly vanished. Little lord, are you dazed by the smoke? In the end, you spent all your remaining money buying 3. As you took a bite, you discovered the bread was so thick it could be used as a shoe sole. The lamb had a strange, fishy odor. The filling contained bits of wool that hadn't been cleaned properly. This is top-quality Turkic lamb. The vendor looked hurt as she saw your disgust. You scholars are too delicate. You forced yourself to swallow, still trying to keep your composure. Suddenly, you understood why Wu Zetian could live to be an emperor. Anyone who could survive in such an eating environment deserved to. At that moment, a ragged beggar looked up at you with hungry eyes, staring at the food you had left. You hurriedly handed him the remaining 2 pieces, feeling a little better for it. You're kind-hearted, sir. The beggar smiled, revealing his jagged teeth. I'll show you a good spot. He pointed mysteriously toward the base of the city wall. They're hiring people to dig trenches over there, and they'll feed you. You were moved, but that was before you saw the food they were offering. Moldy corn rice balls. A soup that had floating vegetable bugs. Side dish of salt-preserved locusts, high in protein. The foreman enthusiastically recommended. Watching the workers eat happily, you finally understood what they meant by hunger being the best seasoning. At that moment, you couldn't help but long for the convenience of modern-day food delivery apps, even if it was just the blandest, most tasteless meal like yellow braised chicken rice. After a whole day of digging trenches, your body ached as you lay down in the makeshift workers' shed, seriously contemplating how to survive with dignity in the Tang dynasty. Just then, the foreman, chewing on a grass root, approached you. Can you read? He asked. You jumped up, wide awake. I can read. And I can do math. Then go try at Boss Wang's shop in the East Market. The foreman spat out the grass root. He's looking for an accountant, pays 2 guan a month. The next day, you put on your only decent clothes and went to apply for the job. Boss Wang was a silk merchant from the western regions. After sizing you up, he suddenly said, write a few characters for me. Confidently, you picked up the brush but froze. The Tang dynasty's writing brush was 10 times harder to control than any pen you had ever used. The words you wrote looked like worms crawling on paper. What was worse was the specific accounting format Boss Wang required. This san is written wrong, he frowned, pointing at your blotchy ink. And here, it should be mo, not bai. It turns out, in the Tang dynasty, numbers had to be written in full form yi, san, s. 500 had to be written as wu bai. Bookkeeping required a special format, terms like jikai and shusho. Just as you thought you were about to be fired, a sudden idea struck you. You pulled out your phone, though it had no signal. The calculator app still worked. Boss Wang stared in shock at this black jade box that could do math. His beard almost stood on end as he exclaimed, This is a secret treasure from the western regions? You nodded mysteriously and seized the opportunity to negotiate 3 guan a month with food and lodging. And so, you began your career as an accountant. Though it came with its challenges. Sitting on your knees all day, your legs felt like they were being pricked by needles. Writing with a brush caused your wrists to cramp. Using the abacus sounded like you were tearing down a house. But at least you didn't have to sleep on the streets anymore. Then one day, Boss Wang mysteriously asked, that black jade box, may I borrow it for a look? You glanced out the window at the patrolling guards and suddenly remembered the law in the Tang Code that prohibited sorcery. You managed to stall Boss Wang's curiosity by claiming that the Western secret treasure required 3 days of fasting to unlock, but you knew deep down that this modern technology was bound to cause you trouble in the Tang dynasty sooner or later. Late at night, in the quiet of the accountant's room, you pondered your escape plan. You scrolled through your phone's album and came across the chronology of major events in the Tang dynasty. To your surprise, you realized that tomorrow was the infamous Wang Yan rebellion, the day when Luoan would erupt into a massive purge. "I need to get out of here. Fast," you muttered to yourself. But how? You were facing 3 major obstacles. Your travel permit had been destroyed in the fire. You only had 500 yuan to your name. The city gates were more tightly guarded than airport security. Just as panic started to set in, you heard commotion in the courtyard. You peeked through the window and saw several Jingwu guards inspecting Boss Wang's goods. The imperial court had received a tip-off about foreign merchants in the West Market hoarding contraband. "It's over, it's over." You frantically shoved your phone into your waistband. Don't laugh. That's how ancient people hid silver notes. Suddenly, inspiration struck and you grabbed the accounting ledger to start forging entries. You listed the black jade box as Lioli counting chips. You made up a business trip to Luoyang for account auditing in your outgoing ledger. In a frenzy, you packed your essential accounting kit, abacus, ink, and dry rations. At dawn, you hefted your bundle and told the night guard, "The boss asked me to go to Luoyang for auditing." To your surprise, he waved you through without question. Turns out, in the Tang dynasty, accountants frequently traveled for audits. As you approached the city gate, your heart was racing. The gate guards rummaged through your bundle, and then one of them picked up the dry rations and sniffed them. "Go on," he waved dismissively and, to your shock, stuffed your rations into his own chest. Just like that, you escaped from Chang'an. As you looked back at the city walls bathed in the morning sun, you suddenly realized the phone in your waistband was painfully digging into your thigh. The so-called dry rations were the worst-tasting flatbreads you had ever eaten. But the feeling of freedom? Absolutely worth it. You journeyed east along the official road, embarking on a true budget travel experience in the Tang dynasty. The first shock came when you realized that the ancient roads were nothing like the smooth stone pavements you saw in historical dramas. Instead, they were bumpy dirt paths turning into mud pits when it rained and swirling into sandstorms under the scorching sun. When you passed by a post station, you spent 20 yuan on a public transport ticket only to find out that the so-called public carriage was actually a modified prisoner transport cart. You and 5 burly men crammed into the sweaty-smelling carriage, and you understood the true meaning of sardine can. What made it worse was the shock absorption system, or rather, the complete lack of it. "Watch out!" An old man shouted just as your head slammed against the roof. This was already the 7th time today. In the evening, you checked into a guest house, hoping for a better experience. "Do you have a private room?" Of course, of course." The innkeeper enthusiastically led you to your room, only to find that they had converted the firewood storage into a room with a wooden bed. The price? 100 yuan. Grudgingly, you paid, only to realize the amenities were uniquely unconventional. The window was paper-covered, but half of it was torn. The door latch was essentially useless. You could push it open with a little force. A family of rats lived under the bed, hosting parties in the middle of the night. The next day, you decided to take the water route, hoping for more comfort. But it turned out the so-called passenger boat was actually a cargo ship that also carried grain. You were crammed into the lower deck with over 30 people. Seasick passengers vomited directly in the hold. There was no such thing as a toilet. When the captain announced, "Tonight, we're having fish," you were so moved you almost shed a tear until you saw the fish was freshly caught from the river by the crew, scales still on, tossed straight into the pot. One of the merchants next to you tried to comfort you. "First time out, huh? This is actually good. On the boat I was on last time, they used river water to cook the rice right from the spot where everyone just, well, you know." After half a month of wandering and hardship, you finally arrived in Luoyang. The moment you saw the city gates, you were so overwhelmed with emotion that you almost knelt down, not out of joy, but because your chronic malnutrition had finally caught up with you, leaving you with dangerously low blood sugar. The guards at the city gates were far more lax than those in Chang'an. You snuck in with a merchant caravan and soon realized that while Luoyang was not as bustling as Chang'an, at least there were no creditors or bounty hunters after you. After spending your last few wen on a steamed bun to fill your stomach, you began contemplating your future. Continue working as an accountant? Your calligraphy still looked like a dog's paw prints. Go back to your old ways and try the Western Treasure Act? It was too risky. You might be burned as a sorcerer. The most reliable option, become a lay disciple at a temple, food and shelter included. You chose the third option. The temple guest monk, seeing that you could read and write, assigned you the task of copying scriptures. Though the work came with its own set of challenges. 6 hours of copying scriptures every day. You had to sharpen your own brushes. A single mistake meant rewriting the entire page. But at least you could eat proper vegetarian meals, albeit lacking in oil and salt, and sleep in a dry meditation room, though you'd have to follow along with evening chants. One day, you accidentally discovered the abbot's secret stash, several volumes of Kaiyun prophecies that he had brought from Chang'an. To your surprise, these texts included the exact date of a comet's appearance. It suddenly dawned on you, you could potentially become the most accurate prophet in history. But then you remembered the unfortunate fellow who had been executed for failing to predict a solar eclipse correctly. That night, you knelt before the Buddha in sincere prayer. I vow to live a balanced life, eating both meat and vegetables, but I only wish to return to the modern world. The moonlight flowed like water, quietly bathing the flying eaves and curled edges of Luoyang's ancient buildings. You sat alone on the stone steps of the temple's meditation hall, playing with an ancient Kaiyun Tongbao coin. The copper coin glowed faintly under the moonlight. This half-month survival experience in the Tang Dynasty flashed through your mind like a revolving lantern, everything from the language barriers in the west market of Chang'an, the rough jolts of the post-road carriages, to this coin which had witnessed the flourishing of the Tang Dynasty. Suddenly, you realized the modern life we take for granted is actually a comfort zone crafted over 3,000 years of human civilization. Behind every sheet of toilet paper lies a 1,000-year evolution from coarse to smooth paper making. Under every light bulb, there's the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who once carved holes in walls for light. The daily struggles you complained about in the Tang Dynasty were, in fact, the most advanced high-tech lifestyle of the time. After all, living in Chang'an, a city of over 1 million people, was already the ultimate urban experience of the 8th century. The resilience of history lies in these contrasts. When you complained about the bitter tea in the Tang Dynasty, did you know that this was the way tea was consumed before Lu Yu's tea classic revolutionized it? When you grumbled about the inconvenience of the curfew, did you consider how this system maintained peace in Chang'an for 300 years? Our ancestors, with their incredible adaptability, created a splendid civilization in an era of bamboo slips and brush pens, post horses, and sailing ships. At this moment, I'd like to ask you, after experiencing all of this, which modern item would be at the top of your survival essentials list? Antibiotics or a smartphone? If you could bring back 3 inventions from the Tang Dynasty to the modern world, what would they be? Wood block printing? The curved plow? Or, in the comments, share in one sentence the most shocking ancient versus modern experience you've had. The night grew deeper, and the distant sound of the temple's ancient bell echoed in the still air. This bell had once sent off Li Bai's lonely sail, listened to Du Fu's poetic musings, and now it accompanied the reflections of you, the time traveler. Perhaps this is the essence of civilization. One generation stands on the shoulders of another, climbing ever higher on the ladder of history. Now, put down your phone if you're using it, feel the constant temperature of your room, touch the cotton of your t-shirt, and realize that these seemingly ordinary modern creations are gifts that have crossed 1,000 years of time. We are incredibly fortunate to be living in the future that all our ancestors once dreamed of. Good night, dear time traveler. May your dreams be filled with the bright moon of the Tang dynasty, and when you wake, may you see the sunrise of the present age. If you'd like, leave a sentence in the comments about your time travel reflection before you sleep. Tomorrow, when we wake, we'll continue discovering surprises in the folds of history. The end. Good night.